Should one eventually come across the black and white artwork of Käthe Kollwitz, what you'll often discover is nothing short of haunting. A truly multi-talented artist in her own right, who completed a vast repertoire of work achieved with sketching, painting, and printmaking, to etching, lithography, and woodcuts. Despite the many means she possessed to make her art, one common theme would always be apparent in her work: unvarnished and deeply emotive political imagery that both brutally and poetically depicts the torment that comes with poverty, hunger, and war on the working class. As is the unfortunate case with most dark arts such as these works, normally the artist behind them carries a life story plagued by tragedy, and Kollwitz sadly would be no exception. Suffering from the loss of family members, including her own son, as well as unstable mental health since her childhood, it almost comes to little wonder how shadowy pictures such as these would be so prevalent in her collection. But what exactly is her story, and what exactly do these harrowing displays of humanity mean? And what exactly can we as modern day viewers learn from her and her artwork? Without further ado, let's find out together. I'd also quickly like to thank user Pinchatono13 for recommending today's video topic. I noticed a few other viewers recommended this artist to me as well over the last few months, so if you're watching, please let me know in the comments so I can favourite and respond to your comment to say thank you. On that note, if you have any suggestions for future videos, I'd love to hear your ideas. Sometimes it gives me the opportunity to explore art that I've never seen before, which is great for my dose of inspiration. So again, please leave a comment below if you have an idea for an artist I haven't covered yet. With that said, welcome to another video everyone. This is a story and artwork of Käthe Kollwitz. Käthe Kollwitz née Schmidt was born on the 8th of July 1867 in Königsberg in Prussia, now called Kaliningrad in modern-day Russia, to parents Karl Schmidt and Katharina Schmidt. Kollwitz's upbringing laid the foundation for a commitment to capturing the human condition with exceptional sensitivity and empathy in her art later in life. Born into a middle-class family, the fifth of 7 children, her parents were strong advocates of education and social justice. Growing up in a home filled with books, lively discussions, and artistic inclinations, Käthe was exposed to progressive ideas and a deep concern for the struggles of the less fortunate from an early age. Tragedy struck young Käthe when she was only 15 years old. Her beloved younger brother, Benjamin, died of kidney disease. This loss had a profound impact on Käthe's emotional and artistic development, influencing her tendency to explore themes of suffering, death, and empathy in her later works. The experience also was believed to have ignited her lifelong anxiety and fueled her desire to use art as a means of expressing her innermost feelings and connecting with the human experience. But even outside of this family loss and the anxiety that stemmed from it, within Käthe's diary, she would even describe suffering symptoms ever since she was young of a neurological disorder known literally as Alice in Wonderland syndrome, a strange condition that affects the visual perception of objects, such as appearing smaller or larger than they are. In her diary, Kollwitz herself complained of episodes where objects appeared to grow larger or smaller, and she would experience perceptual distortions where she felt she was diminishing in size. Therefore, it's been theorized that this may explain why Käthe's artistic style appeared to shift from naturalism to expressionism so often, and why her subjects are often shaped with enlarged hands or faces. The distortion present in her visual art may have less to do with her deliberate emphasis of the artist's feelings and more to do with her perceptual experience. But regardless, Käthe Kollwitz seemed to fall in love with art very early in her youth. From the early 1880s onwards, encouraged by her parents and teachers, especially her father, she began drawing and sketching, often using her family members and surroundings as subjects. She soon after attended art schools in Berlin and Munich, honing her technical skills while also delving into the works of influential artists like Max Klinger and Vincent van Gogh. In 1891, Käthe married Käthe Kollwitz, a physician who shared her passion for social justice, whom she had become engaged to 3 years prior. They settled in a working-class district of Berlin, where Karl opened a surgery as a panel doctor in now modern-day Kollwitzstrasse in the district of Prenzlauer Berg. The couple moved into a flat at the same address. Here is where Käthe Kollwitz would live for over 50 years. After moving to Berlin, Käthe and Karl raised 2 sons named Hans and Peter. Motherhood presented Kollwitz with a new sense of empathy and perspectives on human vulnerability, as well as the innate connection between maternal love and suffering. This year of 1891 would also light the path to her artistic success, as well as marking the start of a particularly significant social and political upheaval in her home country, that would all seemingly later contribute towards her most iconic and most powerful masterpieces. The decade spanning 1891 to 1901 marked a period of profound transformation and artistic growth in the life of Käthe Kollwitz. These formative years not only shaped her creative style, but also laid the groundwork for a lifelong dedication to art as a medium for social commentary and change. In 1891, Kollwitz joined the Munich Artists Association, an association of female artists, where she found a supportive community that encouraged her exploration of themes such as motherhood, social disparity, and the human condition. This was the beginning of her lifelong commitment to giving a voice to the working class, in the arts and society at large. During these years, Kollwitz experimented with various mediums, but it was her mastery of etching that garnered widespread recognition. Her series of etchings titled A Weaver's Revolt, created between 1893 and 1897, is particularly noteworthy from this period. Going by other names such as A Weaver's Rebellion or A Weaver's Uprising, this series of work was created using a lithographic technique, and it truly stands as a testament to Kollwitz's commitment to capturing the essence of human suffering and resilience. The work was inspired by the 1844 Silesian Weavers' Uprising, an event deeply etched in history as a significant labor revolt. The Silesian weavers, who were predominantly women, rose against their exploitative working conditions and low wages, demanding better treatment and fair compensation. Kollwitz's portrayal of this event is poignant and evocative, encapsulating the desperation and determination of the weavers. The artist's decision to focus on the weavers' faces and gestures draws attention to their individual stories, making their struggle relatable and human. The story begins with a piece called Need on sheet 1. We're greeted immediately with disparity in this work, with a mother who leans over presumably a dying child. The child is pale, with sunken eyes and a gaunt face, almost resembling a skull. Another woman looks on with concern in the background, whilst holding her own child, who has their finger in their mouth to still their hunger. This scene highlights the great economic misery of the weavers, serving as the first chapter in this tale of revolt. On sheet 2, the fuel to the fire of the inevitable uprising continues with a picture titled Death. Here we're presented with a haunting theme of none other than Death himself, coming to take a woman surrounded by her family. His bony limb gently touches her from across the table as her child, eyes wide with fear, helplessly watches. The father too, with his back to the viewer, also silently watches on. If you look closely, you may notice Death's other hand is touching a bowl that's been turned upside down on the table. It's been theorized this is meant to symbolize death from starvation. The next work in the series is titled Conspiracy. As the name suggests, it marks a chapter in the story of when the workers are now conspiring to stage a revolt. Leaning in closely to each other as they plot and scheme indicates their extreme caution, but also their determination. The man sitting at the table on the right places his clenched fists on the tabletop and talks insistently to two other men sitting in the dark. The sharp contrast of dark shadows and light in turn adds a sense of drama, much more so than the rejected version as seen here, that only immerses the characters in shadow. Whilst in this one, the entire scene seems to be drenched in darkness, making it far more ominous. The revolt then finally begins in sheet 4 under the name March of the Weavers. Tempers are frayed and accompanied with axes, scythes and wooden poles. The weavers here look utterly emaciated and enraged as they march on to the house of their master. What makes this imagery so significant is in spite of their bravery and their determination to liberate themselves, their postures are still noticeably lowered and their eyes are hollow. It's almost as if they know their march to their freedom is also their march to their death, making the conspicuous sight of a sleeping child on the mother's back all the more distressing given what is to come. The 5th sheet in the cycle presents us with the arrival of the weavers in front of the gates of their master's house. A woman is seen handing out cobblestones to the men, who are seemingly throwing them into the courtyard, whilst others attack the gate with their axes. Even in all this carnage, the children are still not safe from it, as there is also the sight of a mother with her crying infant, right in the midst of all this mayhem. The story bitterly ends on page 6, where we're presented with the crushing defeat of the weavers, overcome by the deployment of soldiers. 2 mourning women are seen in the weaver's room near the corpses, whilst another fallen worker is just being carried into the room. It's believed that the wafts of smoke coming through the door show that the revolt is still ongoing. The woman seen in the left-hand corner, who hides her head in her arms, seems overwhelmed with grief, whilst the other seems paralysed, frozen in shock, illustrating the gravity of the reality of now being widowed during such a harsh period in history. At the turn of a century, as the increasing interest in her work continued to grow around her, so did her dedication to artistically give a voice to the neglected and forgotten, which would be evident from a second famous cycle of prints known as the Peasants' War. Created again using a technique of etching between 1902 and 1908, the Peasants' War draws its inspiration from a book Kollwitz eagerly admired by the German theologian Wilhelm Zimmermann that details the Peasants' War within the Holy Roman Empire between 1524 and 1525. This was a pivotal historical event that saw a widespread uprising of peasants against heavy taxes, serfdom, oppressive feudal systems, and unjust socio-economic conditions imposed by the ruling classes and the Catholic Church. In fact, it was the biggest uprising in Western Europe before the French Revolution. The Peasants' War consists of a collection of 7 powerful etchings, each capturing pivotal moments and emotions of the uprising. The series commences with The Ploughman, which encapsulates the peasants' oppression and lack of rights that triggered the historical uprising. The extremely shallow and low angle of the ploughman's posture symbolizes the peasants' humiliation and oppression. The complete lack of vertical lines as a metaphor for the dignified and the heavy sky above further emphasize the atmosphere of oppression. The narrative continues through prints like Sharpening the Scythe and Arming the Vault, displaying the preparations for the revolt. Sharpening the Scythe is particularly intimate and powerful. It truly expresses the growing determination of a peasant to put up resistance only by showing the half-length image of an old peasant woman who takes a break from her work of sharpening the scythe. the observer, facing the woman eye to eye as a result of a narrow image detail, sees a menacing facial expression with the knitted brows and her eyes narrowed to a slit, and is made aware that the woman clearly seeks revenge for the injustice suffered by the peasants. The sharpening of the scythe is a foreshadowing of a readiness to start the war. Subsequent prints like Outbreak and After the Battle visually narrate the escalating conflict. Outbreak captures the explosive energy of a rebellion's commencement, while After the Battle morbidly portrays the aftermath, the grim realities of loss and destruction. It's also considered to be an eerily premonitory piece, as it features a mother searching through the corpses in the night in some kind of fragile hope to find her missing child. The artist's empathy for the oppressed is palpable in the print The Prisoners. Here we're presented with tightly contained captured peasants, most likely awaiting their execution. Here you may even notice a captured peasant woman with her child, also detained, standing in front of her, embodying the vulnerability and resilience of those who have suffered under oppressive regimes. The intense focus of a woman's upward gaze and the child's lowered posture evokes a universal maternal instinct, fostering an emotional connection with the viewer. Outside of these 7 pieces are also significant contextual works for the Peasants' War, such as Uprising, completed in 1899. This too was inspired by the historic event, and it's said to have prompted Kollwitz to work on an entire series focused on the Revolt a few years later. Another piece titled Inspiration, completed in 1904, was a rejected version for Sharpening the Scythe. According to Kollwitz.de, behind the peasant woman is believed to be a crouching allegorical male figure. The wings of a figure indicate that he is in the tradition of inspiration personified, for which there are models in both Christian and secular art. Käthe Kollwitz's etching shows the figure whispering into the peasant woman's ear. His left hand, clenched into a fist, is pressed down on the woman's shoulder. His right hand is placed on the woman's hand that clutches the shaft of the scythe, as if she wanted to use it herself in the battle. Therefore, it's theorized that Kollwitz intended to demonstrate that the peasant woman had an inspiration to fight back. The scarily sinister aspect of the figure may have made the artist decide to leave it out, as she wanted to represent the Peasants' War as a legitimate struggle of an oppressed group of people. Kollwitz eventually decided not to use allegorical figures in her Peasants' War cycle as a result. One piece that she prepared for the 6th sheet of the series, but would ultimately not be chosen, is also bitterly poignant, titled Woman with Dead Child, completed in 1903. A letter from Käthe Kollwitz reveals that the artist used herself and her youngest son Peter as models for this composition. Quote, "When he was 7 years old and I was working on the etching Woman with Dead Child, I did a drawing of myself holding him in my arm in front of a mirror. That was very exhausting and I groaned. Then he said in his little child's voice, 'Stop groaning, Mum, it's going to be very beautiful.'" End quote. However, what would truly give this particular work of Kollwitz a far more powerful and tragic meaning would be revealed much later, during the outbreak of the First World War. On the 28th of June, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated in Sarajevo, the capital of the Austro-Hungarian province of Bosnia and Herzegovina, marking the beginning of what would later be known as the First World War. Käthe Kollwitz's son, Peter, aged 18, was killed in action on the 22nd of October that same year as a volunteer in Belgium near Dixmude. The loss of her son would be utterly devastating, igniting a stage of prolonged depression throughout most of the rest of her life. I mentioned earlier that the woman with dead child would have a far more powerful significance following this event, which can be best explained by the artist's eldest son, Hans, who associated the death of his younger brother with this very picture. Quote, "I asked Mother where she got the image of the mother with her dead child from, years before the war, which featured in almost all her pictures from that period. She thought she foresaw Peter's death even then. She said she had been crying while working on these images." End quote. In the course of the war, Kollwitz became a pacifist. She would later create a memorial for fallen soldiers to honor her son and all war volunteers. In 1915, she began working on a 3-figure, larger-than-life ensemble that she planned to install on the Haverhill Hills near Berlin. In 1919, however, she discontinued the monument in order to restart it later in 1925. Finally, in 1932, years after the war, the monument was completed under the name The Grieving Parents and placed in the Belgian cemetery of Revolt. However, when Peter's grave was later moved to the nearby Vladsvlor German War Cemetery, the statues were also relocated. Kollwitz would comment on the death of her son as follows. "We women are endowed with the strength to make sacrifices which are more painful than giving our own blood. Consequently, we are able to see our own men fight and die when it is for the sake of freedom." End quote. Just after the war had ended, Kollwitz seemed not to hold back in expressing the pain that came with it. This became clear when looking through her series titled Krieg, meaning war in English. Quote, "I have always tried to shape the war. I could never believe it. Now I have finally finished a series of woodcuts that say more or less what I wanted to say. These sheets should travel all over the world and should tell people, that's how it was. That's what we all carried through these unspeakably difficult years." End quote. We again are presented with 7 images that originally were created with her usual techniques of etching, but eventually would be executed with woodcuts. The first one is titled The Sacrifice, or The Victim. Here a woman offers her child as a sacrifice, unclothed with her eyes closed, signifying that she is sacrificing her child blindly, or at least unknowingly. When looking at the conceptual drawing for this piece made the year after her son's death, much can be revealed almost instantly. The woman bends over the infant she is holding in her arms. She presses her face tightly against the child. Her raised arm creates a stronger impression than in the final version that the woman does not want to give up her child for the war. As a result, you truly can't help but feel the maternal pain of the artist herself, echoed in both of these works. The second image is titled The Volunteers. It's believed once again that Death himself features as a main character, leading the line of volunteers to their doom whilst beating a drum. The faces of the volunteers are a mix of both foolish enthusiasm and desperate apprehension. The rays of light emanating from their heads are intended to reflect the religious attitude with which they went to war. It's theorized that these are many young soldiers in the war that were finally convinced that they had to defend their fatherland, and even sacrifice themselves for it. The series then shifts focus from the build-up to the war to the brutal aftermath and effects of it, starting with the third picture titled The Parents. Quite simply, the following images in this series portray parents mourning their fallen sons and women who have become war widows. This picture in particular went through different transformations during the work on the war portfolio. For example, in an earlier version, Kollwitz sketched a couple sitting next to each other with expressions of shock, sadness, and utter disbelief. Afterwards, she decided to create a composition in which the parents support each other in their grief, merging the figures together in an embrace to almost create a single entity with one single expressive posture. There are also, of course, depictions of women who have lost their husbands to the field of battle, such as the next sheet depicting a woman who is apparently pregnant, sobbing, and holding her body in a protective posture. In the sixth sheet, called The Mothers, a group of women clasp their children, with some noticeably peeking through the gaps. It would seem these mothers are shielding their children from being sacrificed to the war. The image in many ways represents a fortress of protection. Although each mother tightly holds their child individually, there's a real sense of unity. Similarly to the parent's image, it's a collection of individuals creating one singular image. Kollwitz would comment on this particular piece as well in her diary as follows. I am working on the mothers. Yesterday I decided to rework the war sheets as lithographs. I drew the mother embracing her children. It is a representation of myself, with my very own children, my Hans and my little Peter, and I was able to make it a good piece of work." End quote. Finally, Kollwitz ends the war cycle with a 7th sheet titled The People. Here she displays in the centre a figure who most have identified to be the Virgin of Mercy. A child can be seen peering out from under the mantle, whilst behind the figure of a woman are the distorted faces of desperate people, emerging from the dark as they huddle up to her. They are the war victims who survived, albeit with emotional and physical wounds. Once again, Kollwitz would write in her diary, commenting on her progress of the series as she neared completion. Quote, "My work has gone well this year, and I am grateful for that. The war cycle is as good as finished. Insufficient and inadequate it may be, yet if you consider the work's great task, it has come to a conclusion and completion." End quote. By the end of the 1920s, in 1927, on the occasion of her 60th birthday, Käthe Kollwitz had received numerous honours and took part in plenty of exhibitions, one of them being at the Prussian Academy of Art. Among the 500 letters and telegrams on her birthday were congratulations and good wishes from the German Minister of the Interior, the Prussian Minister for Culture, the Reichskonzert, literally meaning Imperial Art Protector in English, and the Mayor of Berlin. By 1929, Kollwitz was the first woman to be awarded the Order pour le Mérite for science and art. The following year, her 3rd grandchild would be born, and even beyond Europe, interest in her work would start to spread. The Chinese writer Liu Jun began exploring the work of Kollwitz. With the support of the American journalist Agnes Smedley, he acquired 4 works in 1931, published essays on the artist, and would publish a portfolio with Kollwitz reproductions in Shanghai many years later. This period, according to the Käthe Kollwitz Museum of Köln, marked the pinnacle of her fame and career during her lifetime. But even so, in the background, the economic and political environment was beginning to change dramatically once again following the end of the First World War. By 1933, the establishment of a National Socialist regime had taken root, resulting in her being forced by the Nazi Party authorities to resign from the Academy of Arts in Berlin after much resistance and many appeals. She was now banned from selling her art in most places. Museums and galleries were beginning to remove her work, and many future exhibitions were now being cancelled. In spite of it all though, Kollwitz would continue to work and create whenever she could. In fact, it would be in the following year of 1934 that she would first start fully committing herself to her next well-known and last major cycle of lithographs, simply titled Death. Although Kollwitz had many different visions and plans for a series based on death for over a decade up until this point, some theorize that it may have been the death of her brother-in-law, George Stern, in 1934, whom she shared a tender friendship with, that officially triggered the process. Unlike the other series of works that we've seen up until this point, Death does not follow a continuous narrative, but instead presents variations on the theme. They show people in different stages of their lives from many walks of life as they are confronted with death in their own personal way. However, as you may notice, the common sight of women and children as the main characters of her art still continues even in this cycle. On sheet 1, we are presented with woman entrusts herself to death. Here death is represented as a liberator, or as a bitter way out of a situation of misery that has become unbearable, which becomes a morbidly familiar sight as the series goes on. Only the hand of death is shown from the viewer's point of view, and this hand does not forcibly grab the mother, but simply takes her hand gently. She seems to accept it in quiet determination, certain of the inevitability of her fate, as her children anxiously huddle against her. This could indicate a harrowing moment of the children not wishing for their mother to go, or it's even been theorized that they too are to join their mother on the journey of no return. In the next sheet, titled Young Girl in the Lap of Death, Death appears to take on the role of a consoler, almost like a maternal figure to the young girl on her lap, wistfully nestling up to her. Her face of sunken eyes and open mouth may indicate that she has already passed away. Death Seizes the Children is the third sheet. This theme is something Kollwitz had already conceived when working on a poster in the 1920s titled Vienna is Starving, Save Its Children. She wrote in her diary as follows: I had another idea for the representation of death, seizing a group of children. He has already got hold of 2 of them. The one who has been torn by his hair is now lying silently on his back, staring at death as if petrified. End quote. In kind, the following piece titled Death Seizes a Woman presents the end of life as being a sudden and violent intruder. Death is symbolized through the cadaverous-looking figure that embraces the mother and her child from behind, taking them by surprise, as evident from the look of wide-eyed terror on the mother's face. What's more disturbing is noticing where the other hand of death is, which seems to be over the mouth of a screaming child as she struggles. The thematic style of the series begins to change with sheet 5, titled Death on the Road, where this time no clear figurative representation of death is included. Here we are shown a poor soul who is shivering with cold and wrapped in a dark coat, abandoned, emaciated, with their eyes closed and their mouth distorted by pain as they lean against a wall. Although, as I said, death does not seem to be physically accompanying this figure, you could almost say from the corpse-like appearance that death and the figure have become one and the same as they await the inevitable. On sheet 6, this time death returns, but we only see the back of his head. Whilst facing towards us is a dying man who joyfully greets death as if he's an old friend. The man's eyes gaze lovingly at death, as if he has come as a long-awaited release. The 7th sheet, although quite hard to make out, is theorized to display bodies sinking into the depths of water. The bent body of a mother pushes the child under, whilst the father's body is upright and his mouth agape as he too begins to sink. The final sheet of the series, rather curiously, shows a self-portrait of the artist herself, with a hand reaching out and gently touching her shoulder. Kollwitz turns towards the hand as she raises hers in a poignant gesture of letting go. Her right lower arm, if you look closely, seems to raise towards the reaching hand to form a link to death. What Kollwitz has achieved with this cycle of hers is truly nothing short of powerful. The works indicate how death comes to us all, and in many different guises, as an act of violence, suddenly and unexpectedly, yet also, in the darkest of times, as something that is even anticipated and yearned for. By 1936, the Nazi takeover was going from bad to worse for many families across German-occupied Europe, including that of Käthe Kollwitz. To a point where in July that same year, due to an article in a Moscow newspaper which was based on an interview with Kollwitz, the Gestapo would even visit the family home of her and her husband Karl for investigation. threatening them with arrest and deportation to a Nazi concentration camp. Thankfully, it would be Kollwitz's own art that would save her and her loved ones. By now, she had become an international icon, treasured by most, and so no further action was taken. However, her work still received much resistance, with still many of her exhibitions being taken down. In fact, works by Kollwitz were confiscated in at least 11 German museums. The works were either sold, exchanged, or deposited with the propaganda ministry as consignment stock. As Kollwitz's plans for public exhibitions in Germany were thwarted, the artist started presenting a selection of her works at her own studio in Klosterstrasse, and the United States would become the main market for the sale of her works. By the beginning of the 1940s, as her health began to slowly deteriorate, Käthe Kollwitz began creating less and less, and would even give up her studio in 1940. However, in the following year, she supposedly made her last ever lithograph, titled "Seed for Sowing Should Not Be Milled." This image is based on a quote Kollwitz had used in her open letter to Richard Demmel's appeal for the final push to win the First World War. The artist would comment on the genesis of the sheet in her diary as follows: "I have decided, for the third time, to take up the same theme set to Hans a few days ago. This is now my legacy. Seed for sowing should not be milled. So I painted the same scene again. Boys, proper Berlin boys, who greedily scent the air outside like young horses, are held back by a woman. The woman, an old woman, has wrapped the boys into her protective mantle, spreading her arms and hands over them in a violent and dominant gesture. Seeds for sowing must not be ground. This demand is not a sentimental yearning, but a command, a demand." End quote. By 1945, after years of conflict and air raids brought on by the Second World War, the war was nearly at an end, but sadly, Kollwitz would not live to see it. On April 22nd, only days away from the end of the war, Käthe Kollwitz died in Moritzburg, aged 77. In September, the urn containing the artist's ashes were taken to Berlin to be buried in the family tomb at the central cemetery in the city. The legacy and impact that Käthe Kollwitz has left behind in not only German art, but also the people of Germany, is quite incredible. More than 40 German schools are named after Kollwitz, and a memorial statue of Kollwitz by German sculptor Gustav Seitz was installed in the Kollwitzplatz city square in Berlin in 1960, where it still remains today. Even a German art award known as the Käthe Kollwitz Prize, again established in 1960, has been named after her. But even outside of Germany, her unwavering commitment to social justice and her ability to channel her passion into powerful works of art have left an incredible mark on the wider world. From her early years to her emergence as a leading figure in European art, Käthe Kollwitz's journey is one of resilience and unyielding determination. But arguably what is most crucial is her work serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of empathy and artistic expression in the face of adversity. Her depictions of a working class, the horrors of a war, and the enduring bonds of family continue to resonate with audiences worldwide. She has left a foundation of potential to inspire new generations to reflect on the social and political challenges of their own time. I'll even go one step further to say that the life and artwork of Käthe Kollwitz presents some of the reasons why I cherish dark art so much. It reminds us of the enduring power art has to illuminate these darkest corners of the human mind, often left ignored or shunned aside, in order to help inspire meaningful change in our lives if we simply allow it to. Käthe Kollwitz's legacy is not confined merely to the pages of history. It lives on in the hearts and minds of those who continue to be moved by her art and the profound message it conveys. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it informative, and I hope it inspired you to explore more of the artwork of Käthe Kollwitz. Before I end this video, it's time quickly for Artist Corner. Here I get to share some artwork sent in by one of my viewers. And today I wanted to share the work of Ellie Nesbitt, who I recently met on Instagram. Ellie is a self-taught digital painter as well as a gallery and cover artist. She currently resides in the Great Lakes lowlands of Ontario, Canada. Her digital portraits are inspired by a collection of unpublished original fairy tale and fantasy narratives. Each painting features compelling expressive eyes, textural brushwork, and fine detail. She enjoys delving into the realms of imaginative realism, surrealism, and dark fantasy. Her digital paintings are sensory symphonies, textures distilled from acute tactile experiences and melodious memories, extrapolations of her heightened sensory life on the autism spectrum. In September 2021, Ellie created Fable to interact with her online audience on Instagram, which is her main social media hub, and in May 2023, she became a member of a Beautiful Bizarre Artist Directory. Addled by severe osteoporosis and multiple compression fractures, Ellie uses the digital medium for meditative and expressive release. In the supine position, she paints with a suspended monitor, engaging steadfastly with those who enjoy her creations and follow her journey on social media. Ellie is currently working on a series of fairy paintings for her original fantasy fiction, The Tin Princess, as well as drawing tutorials for her online audience. With great enthusiasm and determination to help artists, she's creating a publication opportunity with both learning, community, and career building potential. A magazine for artists featuring creators who struggle to be seen by today's social media algorithms. I encourage you all to please show her some love and support by checking out her socials. I've left her Linktree in the description below, as well as a link to her Instagram under the username you can see on screen now. If you too are an artist and would like a chance to potentially feature in a video of mine, I'd love to hear from you. Please send me an email to blinddweller@gmail.com or feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. Please also join the Blind Dwellers Art Club on Discord if you want to get some advice on your art, share some memes, or even ask me a question. It would be great to see you there. Finally, as always, a huge ever-loving thank you to all of my patrons and channel members, and a special shout out to the following top tier donators: Vlad Siv, Mrs. Kelkel, Tyler Butler, Harley Raven, Eric Lamarca, Dave MC, Molotail, The New On Goem 24, Equatamok, Ken B, Lee Flowers, Calvin Kai, Akaiza, Carol H, Fernando Achicalo, Large Fatty or Big Chad, Charlie Sancheesy, and Port Pereira. That's me done for today then, my friends. See you in the next one soon, keep being creative, and bye for now.